Dear learners, I am Christina Georgy, your academic counselor, and I welcome you to my session. Today we will discuss the course code BEGC-133, which is titled British Literature. So in our previous sessions, we discussed blocks 1 and 2 of this particular course code. So if you look at block 1, it deals with Shakespeare's Macbeth. Shakespeare's Macbeth is obviously, as you all know, one of the greatest tragedies. It's a drama by Shakespeare. Block 2 deals with Thomas Hardy's very famous novel, Far From the Madding Crowd. So today in this session, we will once again focus our attention towards yet another drama. So this is Arms and the Man, written by George Bernard Shaw. So before we move on to this particular topic, Arms and the Man as such, it is very important for us to have an overview regarding the writer. So in this particular session, we will discuss George Bernard Shaw in detail. Here we will have a close look at his life, socialism, his major plays, his relationship with Ibsen, and his life in general. George Bernard Shaw. You must have heard of this name because he is quite famous. He is popularly known as GBS, George Bernard Shaw, or monotonously Shaw or Bernard Shaw. It is how he is known. You can say that he was one of the best known intellectuals of Britain. When did he live? He was so active during the first half of the 20th century. So we can say he was in a way a multifaceted genius. Why would we say that? His interests were various and it ranged from music and theatre to politics and philosophy. Remember, he was an Irish playwright. He was also a critic and also a political activist. We look at all these fields in course of time, but always remember he made significant contributions in all the fields that he worked in. That is something that we need to keep in mind. And he was very active and he worked tirelessly till the day he passed away. There is one another person whom you should be aware of. His name is Stanley Wainwright. So he is the biographer of George Bernard Shaw, and it is through Stanley that we get to know more about the life and works of John Bernard Shaw. So you need to keep in mind the biographer's name. What do you mean by a biographer? A biographer is somebody who has written about someone else's life. I hope you are aware of it. Autobiography is something different. Autobiography refers to somebody writing about his or her own life. So do you think G.B. Shaw has won a Nobel Prize? Yes, remember that he has received the Nobel Prize for Literature in the year 1925. Always remember to mention this if at all they ask you a question regarding George Bernard Shaw. Of course, I can assure you that there will be questions from Bernard Shaw. There will be an essay question. Apart from the essay question based on Arms and the Man, there could be a question in general based on the life and works of G.B. Shaw. So now let's discuss in detail the life of Bernard Shaw. He was born in the year 1856. Remember, he is an Irish born playwright. Obviously, he was born in Ireland. To be very particular, he was born in Dublin in Ireland, and he belonged to a very middle class Protestant family. As he belonged to a very middle class setup, he received a very mediocre schooling and was largely self-taught. What do you mean by the term mediocre? It refers to ordinary. He wasn't sent to a very high class school or society for gaining knowledge. He was largely self taught. He also wrote theatre criticism. Very soon, he established himself as the London art and theatre scene. Very soon he established himself as a very famous critic of music and theatre. So, gradually he became well known in the field of criticism with respect to music and theatre. As a result, he wrote many critical articles, that too for various newspapers and journals. An example is mentioned in your study material, the Dramatic Review. It is a journal in which he used to write his works of criticism. Shaw also earned a reputation as a brilliant orator and he gave away several lectures. He was a brilliant orator. What does that mean? He was a good public speaker and he delivered several lectures also. So remember Stanley Wintram? Yes, the biographer of Shaw. So according to the biographer, the 1880s were the decade in which Shaw found himself personally and professionally. So what happened during this period? What changes took place during this period? He became a socialist, he became a journalist, he became an orator, he became a critic, remember, of arts and theatre, critic of arts and theatre, and he started writing reviews regularly for journals and magazines such as The World, The Saturday Review, The Pall Mall Gazette, and others. He also became famous as a playwright. What do you mean by a playwright? A person who writes plays or dramas for that matter. Remember I mentioned that he was also into politics? Yes, Shaw became a political activist. And here is one important point to remember. He became a leading member of the Fabian Society. We'll discuss Fabian Society in detail when we study Bernard Shaw and socialism. Nevertheless, I'll give you an introduction regarding the Fabian Society. Actually, this is a group that got formulated, and this Fabian Society derives its meaning from the Roman general Fabius. Okay, that is something that you can remember. George Bernard Shaw was an active member of this society. The other active members include Annie Besant, Sidney Oliver, Sidney Webb, and others. We will discuss this in detail in course of time. He was also a regular speaker on BBC. Remember I told you he was a brilliant orator, a public speaker? Yes. So he used to contribute his ideas for BBC. About his personal life, he married Charlotte, who was an Irish political activist, and they lived together till her death in the year 1943. So it was in the year 1950 that Shaw passed away. By the time he passed away, he had become a very rich, famous and successful writer. Yes, that would serve as an introduction to G.B. Shaw. Any questions? Is everything clear so far? Thank you. So moving on to Shaw and socialism. So during the 80s, remember according to the biographer, it was during the 1880s that Shaw became so very active. Yes. So he became deeply involved in the activities of the Fabian Society. Now comes an important point. When was the Fabian Society formulated? It was formulated in the year 1884. And about the members, as I mentioned earlier, some of the most prominent left-wing thinkers of the late Victorian era became its members. They include George Bernard Shaw, Sidney Webb, Annie Besant, etc. There was this famous publication, Fabian Essays, published in the year 1889. So this collection contained essays by political thinkers such as Shaw, Webb, Annie Besant, etc. So the Fabians, that is the members of the Fabian Society, rejected violent revolutionary methods. Instead, they preferred to enter local government and use trade to transform society. Trade unionism was used to transform society instead of making use of any other revolutionary methods. So we can undoubtedly say that this involvement with the Fabian Society influenced Shaw's political and social vision. He believed in the equality of opportunity and in the possibility that through social change, human aspiration to lead a better life could be attained. That is, with the aid of a social change, there could be better opportunities for human success. And Shaw remained a socialist all his life, and as a consequence, most of the plays that he wrote have socialist themes in it. He criticizes the rigidities of the British class system and of the capitalist order in most of these writings, especially his plays. I told you that he used to attack the capitalist system by mentioning the injustices, right? So there is a person, Nicholas Green. He was also a critic. So Nicholas Green points out how Shaw maintained a consistent attack on the injustices of the capitalist system through his writings, such as Fabian Essays published in 1889, then The Intelligent Woman's Guide to Socialism and Capitalism published in 1928, and Everybody's Political Votes Vote published in the year 1944. So we can say that most of his plays are built around social issues and concerns. He always supported various social causes such as women's rights and was an advocate of equality of income, the abolition of private property, and changes in the voting system. So, when we look at Bernard Shaw as a dramatist, it is important for us to understand that he lived during the 20th century. Remember, according to the theatre critic Christopher Innes, the 20th century is one of the most vital and exciting periods in English drama. Why was it so? It is because during this period, the Elizabethan theatre in thematic scope and stylistic ambition were in a way made use of. So this gives us an idea of the diversity of themes and the stylistic experimentation in the drama of those times, especially in the 20th century British drama. Remember, the paper we are studying is also titled British Literature. Now let's have a look at some of the other writers who lived during this time. We say contemporaries. What do you mean by the term contemporaries? These are literary personas who lived at the same time as George Bernard Shaw. Who are those people? Let's have a quick look at them. They include J.M. Synge, Zeno Casey, T.S. Eliot, John Galsworthy, Noel Coward, and others. Remember, I kind of handpicked a few very popular names. All these people are well-renowned writers who lived during 20th century, and they contributed remarkably to the 20th century British drama. James Finch, Zeno Casey, John Galsworthy, Noel Coward, T.S. Eliot. You must have heard of T.S. Eliot, right? T.S. Eliot is well renowned for his magnum opus. It is a poetry. It is a poem which is titled The Waste Land. Okay, remember, he is also one of the popular figures of the 20th century. Now, let's have a quick look at some of the most widely acclaimed plays by George Bernard Shaw. So, some critics consider Bernard Shaw to be the greatest playwright in the English language since Shakespeare. Obviously, Shakespeare, we studied his tragedy titled Macbeth in this particular paper, remember? Yes. Apart from Shakespeare, one of the greatest playwrights ever in the English literature scenario could be Bernard Shaw. So says the greatest critics of the era. So, Shaw began his writing career by writing music and also theatre criticism. Remember earlier when we spoke about the life of George Bernard Shaw, we mentioned how he turned out to be a theatre critic and later focused his attention towards novel writing. So novels such as Immaturity, The Irrational Note, then Cashel Byron's Profession, and An Unsocial Socialist. So these four were the few of the early novels written by George Bernard Shaw. So remember to study at least a few of these because we need to mention a few novels by George Bernard Shaw. So we need to have an idea that these are novels and what we are about to discuss further are plays. Okay, there is a clear distinction between a novel and a play. Remember, very often plays have acts and scenes, right? Remember Macbeth, we studied the different scenes. We have the sleepwalking scene, Act 5, Scene 1. Similarly, we study the porter's scene. So with respect to your TEE, make sure that you study these, scenes in detail. For your previous question papers, I've seen questions from the porter scene, from the sleepwalking scene, from the banquet scene. So if you listen to my lecture, I made clear all these things. So I hope you have a clear-cut idea. If not, go refer to that. Macbeth is very important. There will be essay, short questions and probably annotations from Macbeth. Now, let's move on to the plays written by George Bernard Shaw. So his well-renowned plays include Widowers' Houses, written in 1892. In the year 1898, he wrote the play that we are about to study, Arms and the Man. Remember to study the year. Arms and the Man is written in the year 1898. Remember to study that. Now he has written Mrs. Warren's Profession in the year 1898. It would be easy to remember if you think like, oh, both these works are written in the same year. Alright, there is another work which is also written in 1898. It is called You Never Can Tell. Then apart from these, he has written The Devil's Disciple in the year 1901, Caesar and Cleopatra in the year 1901. Remember, it's not Antony and Cleopatra, it's written by Shakespeare. This is Caesar and Cleopatra written by Bernard Shaw in the year 1901. The next one is very popular, Man and Superman. It is written in the year 1903. Then there is Major Barbara, written in 1907. The Doctor's Dilemma, written in 1906. This is also very famous and certain universities prescribe this as part of their MA courses. Then you have Pygmalion, written in the year 1913. You must have heard of Pygmalion, I suppose. If not, there is also a movie adaptation of this particular drama. This is very famous and certain universities prescribe this drama as part of their BA or MA courses. Anyway, we'll have a detailed discussion on the plot of Pygmalion once we discuss these plays in detail. Apart from this, in the year 1919, he has written a play called Heartbreak House. In the year 1921, he has written Back to Methuselah. Then Saint John in the year 1929. In the same year, he has written The Apple Cart. So there is a collection which is called Plays Pleasant and Unpleasant. There is another collection titled 3 Plays for Puritans. So Plays Pleasant and Unpleasant, remember this one is published in the year 1898. It is a collection of many plays written by Shaw. Then 3 Plays for Puritans is written in the year 1901. So these two are his collections. He has also written works of prose. You can see examples provided in your study material. I am referring to the official study material. An example include the quintessence of Ibsenism. Remember Ibsen, we studied Ibsen. We'll also deal with Ibsen in detail in the upcoming session. Shaw and Ibsen, we'll study their relationship in detail. The Perfect Wagnerite in the year 1898. Common Sense About the War 1914. The Intelligent Woman's Guide to Socialism and Capitalism written in 1928. So, my dear learners, you must be wondering why I am explaining all these. It's because this is quite important for you to understand. Remember, firstly, you have just 4 works to study. That means you have just 4 authors to study. So you need to have a clear-cut idea regarding the life and works of all the 4 of them. And give due importance to Bernard Shaw, because if you are lucky, you will receive the essay question from John Bernard Shaw. Remember, there will be multiple options. One of them would be from Macbeth, I assure you. The other one would be from Arms and the Man. So be prepared. Even if they don't ask you a separate question on the life and works of Bernard Shaw, they will certainly ask you this essay question where you can write all these as if the preliminary paragraph. What do you mean by the preliminary paragraph? The very first paragraph. So another tip that I would like to give you is that only if you study many would you remember half of it, at least, to be very practical. None of us are robots. It's not very easy to have very scanner memory. So unless you revise and re-revise, you won't be able to remember. For that matter, I have given you multiple tips. Make notes of the important points, make notes of the important works, mark using markers, or use any technique that would help you prepare effectively for your TEE. It's high time to start your preparation. So with respect to these works, I have explained at least some 15 to 20 works in class. So if you study 10, you will remember 5. So when you study, remember to study from all the different genres. Suppose study some novels by him, at least study 4 so that you can remember at least 2. Then when it comes to drama, there are plenty of plays. So study 10 of them so that you will remember at least 5 to 6 of them. And remember to pay attention towards the prose works also. So I am very sure that you will easily remember The Widower's Houses, obviously Arms and the Man, because we are studying that. Mrs. Warren's Profession is easy to study. Then The Devil's Disciple, Caesar and Cleopatra, try to remember that. Major Barbara, Doctor's Dilemma, Never Leave Pygmalion, do mention Pygmalion, because it's very important. Saint John also, it's easy to remember. The Apple Cart too. At least you can study these, right? These are quite easy to remember. If there is a will, there is certainly a way. Everything would seem tough at the very first glance, but we need to make our own effort to make things easy. Now, during my introduction, I told you that Ibsen used to be a strong influence on Bernard Shaw. So let's have a detailed look at the bond that they shared. Shaw found British theatre at the end of the 19th century lifeless and uninspiring. So in his attempt to transform the British theatre, he was deeply influenced. Who? Bernard Shaw was deeply influenced by the work of another dramatist. You can guess his name. Who's that? Ibsen. Remember, he's a Norwegian dramatist. He is from Norwegia and his full name is Henrik Ibsen. Henrik Ibsen. So your study material mentions that Andrew Sanders, in a work titled A Short History of English Literature, notes how the spirit of Ibsen is evident throughout Shaw's long dramatic career. That is, to put it in simple terms, in most of the writings of Shaw, this influence of Ibsen was evident. So one major concept that Shaw has borrowed from Ibsen is the concept of thesis play. It is also called the problem play. Okay, so this first appeared in France in the work of Émile Auger and Alexandre Dumas. These people were dramatists, very notable dramatists. But it was Henrik Ibsen who perfectionized or took this artistic form into perfection, and it was through his works titled The Pillars of Society, Ghosts, A Doll's House, An Enemy of the People, and others that Ibsen made use of this particular style, which is known as problem play. Later, who made use of that? Ibsen's problem play was adapted by Shaw. So later, the 19th century European drama was dominated by a form of drama called the well-made play, which is based on a typical structure and artificial conventions. I mentioned that there is a prose work by Shaw titled The Quintessence of Ibsenism when we discuss the prose works by Shaw. So in this particular work, Shaw summarizes the main aspects of Ibsen's innovative drama, and he also shows how it transformed the European theatre of his time. Shaw has mentioned the technical innovations brought about by Ibsen. So there are mainly two innovations mentioned. Firstly, making discussion the center feature of a play, and secondly, making ordinary people the characters and the life situations, the incidents of drama, thus getting rid of the unreal characters and unreal situation. So to explain this better, see, I mentioned that the 19th century was popular for well-made play which made use of artificiality and conventions, right? So according to Shaw, these changes brought about by Ibsen included focus on ordinary people and their character, which was a great change, and also making discussion the center feature of a play. Now let's have a look at a brief overview on some of the most popular works by George Bernard Shaw. So Bernard Shaw's creative writing is defined and shaped by his political and social vision. As a result, these aspects get reflected in most of his writing. So if we look at his very first play, remember to study this one, Widowers' Houses, which was performed in the year 1892. Widowers' Houses, which was performed in the year 1892. So this is the very first play recorded with respect to Bernard Shaw's career, and this particular drama was published along with The Philanderer and Mrs. Warren's Profession in the collection Plays Pleasant and Unpleasant. Remember, when we referred to his works, the overview, we studied this particular collection, right? So three works that fall under this collection are mainly Widowers' Houses, Philanderer and Mrs. Warren's Profession. Now I told you about his interest in politics and social vision, right? Yes. So if we look at his plays, some of the plays by Shaw are concerned directly with economic, social and class questions. You need to study this one. So which are these plays? According to Nicholas Green, he is another critic who has mentioned that there are 5 plays of such nature, which include Widowers' Houses, Mrs. Warren's Profession, John Bull's Other Island, Major Barbara and Pygmalion. Remember to study these 5 names. So when you study his works, make sure that you study these 5. What are the advantages of studying these? Firstly, you can make use of these names in both the sections. When they ask of the general works, you can mention, and when you are writing an essay, if you need to mention about his writing style or his interest in writing about economic, social and class questions, then also you can mention these 5 works. So this is given as part of page 126 of your official study material. Widower's Houses, Mrs. Warren's Profession, John Bull's Other Island, Major Barbara and Pygmalion. Okay, as I mentioned, you need to have a brief idea regarding the Pygmalion. Okay, whenever you study a play, remember to study the proper title. Okay, the title is Pygmalion. Okay, Pygmalion, published in the year 1916. I request you to study the year also, because it is one of the best known plays ever written by Bernard Shaw. Has any one of you watched this movie which is adapted from this particular play, Pygmalion, an English movie? So if interested, you may watch. I know you're struggling to prepare for your TEE, but when you get time, maybe after your TEE, this is interesting, because the story centers around this flower girl Eliza Doolittle and the phonetics professor Higgins. And in this particular play, Professor Higgins tries to teach this girl standard English. So it is very interesting to watch, and after teaching her, she becomes presentable in upper class society. Okay, so it has got an element of social criticism in this particular play. And as I mentioned, this play formed the basis of an extremely popular musical titled My Fair Lady, and later a film of the same title. So if interested, you can refer to the movie My Fair Lady. Let's have a quick look at some other works also. John Bull's Other Island, published in the year 1904. So Shaw wrote this play at the request of W.B. Yeats. Remember, he is one of the well-regarded poets. W.B. Yeats, you must have heard of him. So John Bull's Other Island and O'Flaherty V.C. are the 2 plays by Shaw to have Irish settings and theme. So as you don't have one word question, they wouldn't ask you this in particular. Name 2 plays of Shaw which has got Irish settings. Nevertheless, you need to have an idea. Okay, when you write about Shaw, you can mention these. These are key aspects, right? 2 plays are there with Irish settings. These are these 2. Which are they? John Bull's Other Island and O'Flaherty V.C. Man and Superman, remember that one. Superman is a philosophical play. It has this major characters Jack and Anne Whitefield. It is written in the year 1903. Then we have Major Barbara, which is published in 1907. There is also one major character, Barbara, a major in the Salvation Army. And you need to understand that this play portrays the conflict between spiritual and worldly power. There is Candida, published in 1898. It is a play about the relationships between Candida, a lady, her husband James Morrell, and the poet Eugene Marchbanks. Okay, that is an interesting play. There is a novel titled Candide, written by Voltaire. Earlier it was prescribed, now I don't think you have that to study. Then not as part of this paper, it was prescribed in the universities. There is Saint John, written in the year 1925. It is more or less a play based on historical events. You know Joan of Arc, right? Yes, this is a play based on the life of Joan of Arc. One important aspect to remember is that Shaw has received the Nobel Prize for Literature in the year 1925. By heart that year, Bernard Shaw has received the Nobel Prize in the year 1925. And he has been such a widely acclaimed, celebrated dramatist that his plays continue to be read, performed and discussed in the 21st century. Even today in 2022, when we study British literature, we are discussing Bernard Shaw and his work. So that reveals how important he is to the entire literary canon. Alright, so that was a brief introduction to the life and works of George Bernard Shaw. To summarize what we have discussed today, firstly we started off with a general introduction. Thereafter we moved on to the life of Bernard Shaw in detail. We looked at Shaw and socialism, the establishment and the active movement of the Fabian society we studied in detail. Then we looked at Shaw as a remarkable dramatist of the 20th century. Thereafter we looked at a whole lot of plays written by George Bernard Shaw, his influence. That is, Ibsen was an influence on George Bernard Shaw, the use of problem plays. Then according to Shaw, the technical innovations brought about by Ibsen, which include focusing on ordinary people and making discussion the center point. All these things we discussed. We also had a brief overview of some of the most remarkable works written by Shaw, including the Pygmalion, written in 1916. And remember, he had received the Nobel Prize for Literature in the year 1925. So that's all for today. In our next session, we'll discuss the Arms and the Man, a wonderful play written by George Bernard Shaw, in detail.